This episode of Brains on Games will talk about Maul Peak, a two-player battling game from Pencil First Games. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we are going to talk about Maul Peak, which is a two-player asymmetric battling game with some of the best meeples I think I've seen in any game that I've played. Now, here is the box for Maul Peak, and it might be a bit shiny because this box has a glossy finish. Everything about the production of this thing is top-notch, and I'll show you the box organizer and everything here. But Maul Peak is a two-player game. Now, it's a standalone expansion for another game from Pencil First, and if you combine Maul Peak with Skulk Hollow, you will get a four-player game. But if you're just playing this on its own, it's a two-player game. They sent an expansion. So there are other expansions. This is a solo adventure deck for Maul Peak. But we're going to talk about the two-player game. If you just get this box, it's a two-player game. You can play with kids age 12 and up, although honestly, I think younger kids can figure this one out. And it's a game that plays in only about 40 minutes. Let's take a deeper look at Maul Peak. Like I said, I wanted to show you the box and the organizer that's in here because this is a game that is, like, everything about it is top-notch. The cover of the rulebook is cardboard, so this is some big, thick paper. There's lots of examples of how to play the game in here. Then you've got the rules for combining Maul Peak with Skulk Hollow. Underneath that are the player boards, and underneath that you get your decks of cards. So each player is going to have a box with cards and their meeples in it. Then there's some extra cubes and things like that. I did put some extra pieces here on the end because one of the creatures is actually made up of two meeples and two separate meeples I couldn't get back in the box with the cards and everything else that has to go in there. So this is the organizer and it's a great one. But let me get the board set up and we will take a look at Maul Peak. Maul Peak is a battling game, and it's totally asymmetric. It's medium, I would say, in terms of its complexity, but at the beginning of the game, one player is going to choose to be the guardian or the giant kaiju that's going to be attacking these little bears. The Grizzar are the bears. So there are multiple little bears, and there's one giant kaiju that's coming after them. At the start of the game, the Grizzar player is also going to get a Winter Beast, who's another little meeple that can move around the board and help them out. Now, as you saw in the box, there are multiple different creatures that you don't just have to choose this as your kaiju. There's a giant spider, and there's all kinds of monsters in that box, but each monster plays very differently, and you've got your player board that explains all of the creature's powers and the effects that they can do in the game, as well as victory conditions. How do you win a game of Maul Peak is the Grizzar have to defeat this giant guardian, and the guardian can either defeat all of the Grizzar on their side of the board, or they can meet that victory condition. And in the case of Saboso, if he freezes 4 of those bears, then he's going to instantly win the game. So there are options to choose different guardians. There are also options to choose different winter beasts, and each one has a different ability. So there's lots of replayability here. You begin the game with the guardian on one side of the board and the Grizzar on the other, and then you play the game by taking actions using cards. So you may have noticed, and I'll put a picture up of the player boards, but the Guardian board and the Grizzar board show how many cards you can have in your hand, and in the case of Saboso and the Grizzar, there's 4, and how many actions they can take. Different Guardians have a different hand size and a different number of actions that they might be able to do on their turn. So you're going to have, as the Grizzar or as the Guardian, you're going to have these 4 action cards. You get to take 3 actions, and you play a card, and you take one of the actions on that card. Sometimes the cards only have 1 action on them, like gain 3 rage. Those are those little red cubes that you may have seen in the box. But others have 2 different actions. So you may be able to move somewhere on the board, or you've got some leaping or climbing actions that you can do as well. Saboso plays the same way. So the Guardian is going to play the same way. They're going to have a hand size. Their cards are going to have actions on them. Each of the Guardians has different actions that they can perform, and there's a separate deck of cards for each of those Guardians. Like I said, one of the things that Saboso wants to do is to freeze characters and kind of take them inside of his body. He's this giant abominable snowman who's taking the Grizzar inside of himself and putting them in a cage. As you play through the game, the Guardian is going to get these orange power cubes. There are some cards that allow him to gain some cubes. Those cubes can be spent to take an extra action. Meanwhile, the Grizzar get rage cubes in this game, and the rage cubes can be spent to draw a card or to summon other Grizzar onto the board. So there are a number of these little bears that can be summoned because you need multiple characters in order to defeat this giant Guardian who's trying to knock all of those bears off the board. So there are several different ones. Each one has a unique ability too. They all have little health counters on them. And so when the kaiju, I keep calling it a kaiju, when the Guardian knocks, one of their health down using an attack, then you're going to put a little red heart to show that they've been wounded, and there are blue wounds for the Guardian. So you're going to be running around this little board with the Guardian trying to attack the bears and the bears trying to defeat that Guardian. But this is only half of the story here, because how do the bears attack this giant thing? It's easy for the Guardian to attack. He's got these cards that will allow him to do all kinds of damage. He can freeze the bears so that they can't move. But this is only half the board, because each of the Guardians has a separate game board that the bears can leap onto in order to attack. So you've got this, here's Saboso right here, but if you flip it over, you can see that he's got these, it really is a separate map that the bears can jump onto and begin to attack. So as you play the game, you might have some bears on the main map kind of running around and trying to stay out of the Guardian's way, and some bears are going to leap onto the Guardian, and that's where they can do their damage. The Guardian only gets defeated once all of these spaces on his map are damaged, so you've got to cover up all these little hearts with the wooden hearts that came in the box. Another interesting thing here, a strategic thing about the game, is that if one of the Guardian's abilities are completely covered by those little wooden hearts, they can no longer use that power. So now all of a sudden they're going to have cards in their hand that are just junk because they can't use it. The Grizzar don't have any healing abilities, so they can't, once they're damaged, and they can be removed from the game. But the Grizzar does have a card that will allow him to take one of these damage counters off, and that can allow him to access that ability again. So it is a really thematic and a very differently playing game, depending on whether you're the little bears who are running around trying to attack the giant monster, or you're playing as the giant monster. I certainly found when I was playing that it was very important to jump up here to the trap section and as soon as possible start knocking out that trap, so that, because if 4 bears get trapped, that's the end of the game. So I wanted to make sure that I delayed or interfered with the Guardian's ability to trap me in the cell that's there in his stomach. And it's just so, I was amazed with these meeples, because you've got the cell right here. You could see the cutout in this giant monster, and it's there on the map as well. And that's basically the game. You go back and forth, you play your cards in order to take those, well, in the case of the Grizzar and Saboso, they get 3 actions. So you play those 3 cards, you do whatever damage that you're able to do, and then you refill your hand, and then the other player gets to go. Now, what skills are you exercising when you play a game like Maul Peak? Well, this is very much a visual spatial problem-solving game. You've got 2 boards, and you're trying to maneuver those bears around those 2 maps in order to avoid being attacked by that giant monster, or in order to do some damage that will prevent him from being able to win the game. Meanwhile, as the Guardian, you're trying to trap those bears. Well, in the case of Saboso, literally trap the bears in his stomach. You're trying to trap those bears so that they can't get away, and so that you can do as much damage to them as possible and knock them out of the game or meet your other unique victory condition. It's also a game that really does exercise the executive functioning skills. Now, executive functions are the skills and behaviors that you need to work towards a goal. And in this case, you really do have to plan carefully. You're budgeting the cards in your hand. You're budgeting those rage cubes or those power cubes. You are trying to think ahead about where the bears are going to be or where the guardian's going to be in order to do the most damage or avoid taking damage. So there is a lot of planning and thinking ahead, I think, in this game. It's not too complicated. You're not juggling too many things all at once, and your hand size is limited, but you are doing some planning, some budgeting, and you're trying to efficiently take down your opponent. The other skill maybe that we found that we were exercising in this game, certainly when you're playing as those little bears, you have to be able to do some stress management. We did find when you're playing as those small creatures that big guardian can do so much damage so quickly. He can take you out of the game. Saboso in particular can take you out of the game by freezing you, and then you lose the ability to use that character when they're frozen. So each move I found as the Grizzar was kind of stressful. So we did have to do a little bit of, it was fun stress, don't get me wrong, but we did have to do a little bit of stress management when you're playing as that tiny creature trying to take down, that David versus Goliath situation. Final thoughts about Maul Peak. Well, this is a game that really does have amazing components. I'll put up a graphic of all of the meeples, the guardian meeples. The bear meeples it's very clear who's who. They even have little logos printed on them, and there's a picture of the bear in the corner of the card. Each of the Grizzar have unique powers, and in fact, the mage was fantastic because the mage could attack the guardian from anywhere on the boards, which was perfect because you don't have to jump up on top of it and have those cards to maneuver yourself into place. I mean, absolutely the best creature meeples that I have played with. I really do love I think Everdell was probably the last game I played that had meeples that I really, really appreciated. But this one, those monsters are so amazing. It's so thematic. It feels completely different when you're playing as those little bears trying to jump up on top of that big monster versus you're playing that giant creature who's trying to take out those little tiny bears. It's so asymmetric, so thematic, super thematic, and asymmetric. Each monster plays differently and feels different when you're playing it. The Grizzar feel totally different from playing as the giant guardian. It's a little bit like I remember years ago I used to play Star Wars miniatures, and we had the giant AT-AT. The AT-AT is still up there on my shelf. We had the giant walker, and all the little Jedi are running around trying to take it down. And so always my kids wanted to be the big AT-AT, and the little rebels were almost powerless against it. You had to be really strategic in order to win as the smaller creature. And this game reminded me a little bit of that feeling of playing Star Wars miniatures, because it's such you've got the little tiny scrappy army versus that giant unstoppable beast. And there's tons, like I said earlier, there's tons of replayability here because you've got multiple winter beasts that you can play as. You've got multiple guardians that you can play with. You can combine it with Skull Hollow. So there's so many different options that you can play, and it does feel differently when you're playing. It feels different when you're playing as different creatures in this game. Now, is there a downside here? I mean, I really enjoyed everything about this game. I did find that it was stressful, but it was stressful in a good way when I was playing as the Grizzar. It's a two-player game, so unless you have the other, Skull Hollow, you're going to be playing at only a two-player count, which for some folks might be a downside. I don't think, because you can combine it and it is pretty flexible, I don't really think that's a downside. I think when I'm playing with my kids, they're always going to want to be the giant monster, just like they wanted to be the AT-AT when I was playing Star Wars. So, I didn't get to play as the monster in any of my games that I played. I was always the little bears trying to take down the monster. So, your mileage may vary on that one, but it certainly would be fun to play as that big creature. The only thing I can say, right, that's not really a downside. The only thing I can really say, the only minor quibble I had was that when reading the rules, we found how you spend those rage cubes to be a little bit confusing at first, because they have a box in the rule book that explains you can take extra actions with these rage cubes, but they kind of conflated the extra, summoning actions and other things that you can do with the abilities on your bear cards that require you to spend rage cubes. So it was a little confusing reading just that one part of the rules. Everything else was super straightforward and clear. It was just that one thing that it took us a minute to figure out, because you could read it in multiple ways. So there was one thing in the rule book that wasn't super clear, but otherwise, I mean, we had a great experience playing Maul Peak, and it did make me want to seek out Skulk Hollow. Actually, I haven't picked that up yet, but it did make me want to pick out Skulk Hollow, because it would be fun to have a 4-player game of this and sort of have the teams of the little tiny creatures trying to take down 2 monsters at the same time. So I really do have to thank Pencil First Games for sending Maul Peak my way. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.